Hi everyone and welcome to our fourth STRATES. I'm Gülsah and I'm with my husband Gonzalo here, as always. And today we want to talk about something that is everywhere in the media right now, loneliness. But actually we will not talk about loneliness.
You are right, we're going to talk about the opposite, or if we want to be a bit more precise, the antidote.
Yes, solitude, which sounds like the same thing, but not actually.
It's not the same thing. Loneliness is the pain caused by being alone, while solitude is a capacity, it's a skill, it's the capacity to be alone without suffering. So one is the wound, the other is a skill.
And our argument today is that a lot what we are calling a loneliness epidemic is actually, at least in part, a solitude deficit, a loss of that skill.
Correct, which changes completely the frame of the conversation, because if it is a skill, it can be rebuilt. As you said, people are talking about an epidemic, but I think it's worth challenging this predominant discourse. Even though you hear the word everywhere, you're hearing the WHO talking about it. You heard in the States the Surgeon General and different health authorities of different countries have been saying things like epidemic, health crisis, public health emergency. So it's not to say that nothing is happening. There is suffering. The suffering is real.
Yes, that suffering is real. Exactly.
But long-term data tells a more nuanced and complicated story than that. Headlines are great. They catch the attention. They sell newspapers. That being said, there is a study by Claude Fisher from Berkeley who tracked social connectedness in the United States. It's true, so it's limited to the United States, but it's a study that's been going on from 1970s to the present. So it's a lot of data.
Yeah.
His finding is that core social networks have remained remarkably stable. In 2024, he went as far as to call this epidemic, this loneliness epidemic, a myth.
Which is provocative.
Very, but once again, if we want to challenge the prevailing discourse, sometimes provocation is needed. Another researcher, Eric Kleinberg, made a very similar point. From one side, the number of people living alone today is the highest ever in history. Nevertheless, loneliness rates have not risen in proportion, which tells a story, a more nuanced story, as I said. It tells a story of being alone by choice, living alone by choice. Of course, when we're looking at historical data, there is a big factor that tarnished the data quite a lot, the COVID epidemic. But even there, Lucchetti and colleagues, they did a study about loneliness during the epidemic and during the recovery period. And what they found is, of course, there is a huge spike because of the confinement, the involuntary separation of people. No doubt there, but values recovered to baseline levels relatively fast. And the general trend did not shift. So yes, there is an anomaly, but the general trend remained constant.
So the epidemic is not an epidemic.
It all is in the framing. So the way it's being framed, no, it's not an epidemic. Something is happening. So we shouldn't lie to ourselves. Marriage rates are down. Birth rates are down. Civic participation, as you know, I'm a volunteer firefighter, so civic participation is quite an important dimension to me, is contracting. There is an interesting book, Bowling Alone, that Robert Putnam wrote, where he documented how this scaffolding of social life is being reorganized. However, the rates of objective loneliness are largely stable.
So here the question comes, why does it feel much worse?
Exactly, it's a very pertinent question, and it's where it becomes an interesting discussion point, because few things are happening at the same time. Third places, you know, what Ray Oldenburg defined as places that are neither work nor home. These third places are shifting, they are being hollowed out. Changing habits in people are making it that these third places, be it a bar, a restaurant, a discotheque, or whatever, people are not meeting so much there as they used to.
Did you see the news about Lithuania?
Yeah, that sounds quite funny. They are planning to reopen nightclubs to promote people from meeting, because their objective being, okay, maybe then people will get together, they will have kids, natality, so birth rates are going to go up.
It is almost absurd as a policy, no?
It is absurd. It is absurd in a sense, but it signals that there is a real shift. This infrastructure for unplanned human contact is vanishing. That has consequences. Obviously, for a country, natality rates is a clear consequence. Technology, again, is not something that is helping either. If you look at some research done by Sherry Turkle, it shows that we are extremely connected now. So you can have a Google Meet, you can have a WhatsApp with somebody at the other end of the world immediately, but we have never been more isolated. And of course, now with AI, you know, AI girlfriends, AI companions, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, or whatever, those things are not improving this connectedness. On the contrary, because they are very low effort, very frictionless ways to feel a sort of connection.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they do not train social skills, because those tools will never tell you, an AI girlfriend will always be yes, whatever you want, my darling. We'll never have a busy schedule or feel bad or be in a bad mood or just differ, have a different opinion. We'll go along. So your social skills are being degraded. It's like a rabbit hole. The deeper you go, the worse it gets.
Yes. And there is always something to feel in it.
You're talking, I think, about the silence
Yes.
that people have inside. Always, people are looking. They are not used to having this silence, so they are always looking for something to fill it. You know, this whole situation of meeting people in person is even made worse by shifts in work practices. Remote working, the gig economy, which is in a sense even worse because it even removes the sense of belonging. all that dissolves these shared spaces, be them real or virtual spaces. So historically, in our parents' times, people would meet friends, life partners, everything, either through work, studies, or their network of friends.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist anymore. So there is a change in the quantity of social contact. However, it does not paint a full picture because this does not explain what happens inside of people when they are alone.
Yeah.
And there is a very interesting research done by Cacioppo that established that loneliness is biologically devastating. If you remember the CTRA,
Yes.
that we talked about in our strat about change, what happens is that this loneliness, your brain recognizes this loneliness as a threat. It becomes a persistent threat because it's not going away, it becomes chronic, and this causes cardiovascular issues, immune system disorders of all sorts, but also epigenetic aging. So this CTRA mechanism we discussed last time accelerates your aging just because you have this constant threat of being alone. The thing is that what I find very interesting is that Cacioppo did not measure objective loneliness, number of social contacts, amplitude of social networks and things like that. What he measured is self-reported, on a Likert-like scale, self-reported loneliness. So, which tells me that the variable he was measuring was not actually loneliness, but it's the perception of loneliness. So it's this perception of loneliness which is causing all this damage.
And if your perception changes?
Well, the biology follows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, which brings us to our subject. If you develop solitude resilience, which means the skill of seeing the fact of being alone as something non-threatening, it's not just a psychological achievement, you put your badge, you're happy, great, you did it. It's physiological, it has physiological consequences.
So how did we lose it? Because at this point, people will be asking this.
It's a very fair question. And personally, I think that the answer is generational, and it's quite concrete. A researcher called Peter Gray documented this extensively. Children who grew up in the 60s and 70s had a lot of unstructured and supervised time. When you were not at school, or in some selected activities, or doing your homework. You were like a free-range chicken, basically.
Yeah.
You were outside, you were meeting people, so there was not this activity planned for you, your parents were 5 meters away, etc.
Yeah.
This unstructured, unsupervised time made you get bored.
Yes.
There was not a constant stimulation, a constant structured things. Those afternoons became long and boring.
And boredom is uncomfortable.
Very, very much so. But, that discomfort was training. You had to find something inside yourself to help you deal with that silence. This created a sort of internal companionship. Besides fostering creativity, because Then you needed imagination. You needed to, imagine that 2 sticks were swords, or the little toy soldiers, the little wars, or whatever you had with what you had at that point. You needed to create things, so lots of creativity exercised. It also taught you to be alone with yourself, to find companionship within yourself.
Yes. Winnicott, he called this the capacity to be alone. And what I like about his work is that his formulation is that he says that it develops in the presence of another. A child, playing in a room alone by himself, by herself, but aware of a trusted caregiver nearby. That child is building that way internal scaffolding.
Yes.
The safety of the other, eventually becomes internalized, and you carry it with you.
Correct. But as you well know, the parenting norms shifted. Structured activities, supervised everything, schedule afternoons, play dates, helicopter parenting.
Yes.
This space where you could get bored and you could develop your creativity and your resilience to solitude contracted. Twenge and colleagues tracked something very interesting across generations from 1960 to 2002. Again, it's quite a long study.
Yeah.
What they saw is a consistent shift in the locus of control. So the belief of where the agency is, where the capacity of effecting change and control in your life is. Mm-hmm. It moved from inside to outside. Mm-hmm. Each generation reported a feeling of less personal agency. So more external locus of control.
Mm-hmm. And which connects directly to what we said in our change episode.
Absolutely. The capacity to be alone and this sense of internal agency are not separate things. Mm-hmm. They will develop together. If you lose one, the other weakens. I'm quite a fan of the Stoics.
I know very well.
And there is a phrase from Epictetus, more than 2,000 years ago, it's even the basis of Viktor Frankl's work. Mm-hmm. He said that men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinion about things. Mm-hmm. This might sound like a very philosophical, nice phrase, but I'm not putting it out there as decoration. Mm-hmm. It's quite clinical as an observation, actually. Albert Ellis, mm-hmm. The founder of REBT and founder of the Albert Ellis Institute in New York, built his entire ABC model on it. He even mentioned Epictetus explicitly as a source of inspiration in his work.
The ABC?
Yes, the ABC, you have an activating event. Something happens, some external stimulus. Mm-hmm. For example, being alone. It's an activated event. That triggers a belief. Mm. In this case, being alone can trigger a belief of, I'm not enough, I am unloved, I failed. Society tends to tell women that by a certain age they have to be married, have children, and this and that. So being alone will trigger in those people, will tend to trigger mm-hmm. in people that have been told these things, the belief, okay, yes, maybe I'm not good enough, I am unloved, I'm not worthy. Yeah. I have failed.
I am a failure.
Exactly. Yes, but that's cognitive fusion, what you mentioned.
Yes.
The C is the consequence. So what is the consequence is It can be depression, but it can also be anxiety, panic, the urge to reach for the phone, call somebody, or scroll in social media, to feel the silence, knowing how bad social media it is for that, comparing yourself to the fake lives that everyone posted on social media. What is interesting is that Ellis identified that the intervention is not and can never be at the activating agent, because lots of those things are uncontrollable. You had planned a date, your date, the person does not show up because the car broke, the weather, work, or doesn't want, simply,
Yes.
and you find yourself alone. So you don't have full control over external events.
Mm-hmm.
The intervention, on the other hand, is at the belief.
Yes.
And that is exactly what solitude resiliency is changing B, making B, instead of threatening, making it something neutral, or even eventually welcome. Having time, me time,
Mm-hmm.
for yourself, to be alone with yourself.
Mm-hmm. In the work what I do with EFIT, Dr. Sue Johnson's emotionally focused individual therapy, actually this is where we start. When someone is alone and immediately distressed, then there is a music playing. But of course, it's not like the music, it is internal signal actually.
Yeah.
So it is often fear, sometimes grief, sometimes shame also, that solitude activates.
Yeah.
And the work is not to silence that music, like you were just mentioning. It is to identify it. You need to identify it and to find out, where it is coming from, this signal. What this attachment point is, the attachment wand it's pointing at.
Yeah, if you don't find the source.
Yes. You just keep escaping and you change your environment, you change your partner, you move cities, but that music is following you. So because it was never about the environment, it was always about internal. It was always about us.
Yes, of course. So this is exactly what we said in the episode about change, actually, with the same metaphor. You can move to New York,
Yes.
but if your internal patterns do not shift, you will end up building for yourself the exact same situation.
Exactly, and once you find once you find the source, once you can sit with that emotion, you name it, you process it, rather than you avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
The solitude stops feeling like abandonment. And it starts feeling like presence with yourself.
Well, you know that I like quite a lot. I identify myself to a certain extent with Steve Hayes' work on acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yes.
And you just mentioned two very interesting things. First, this presence, this being with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There is an interesting parallel there to make with the self as context in ACT, the observer self,
Mm-hmm.
the self that watches the thoughts go and come, but does not attach itself to them, does not believe them.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting parallel there is the mechanism of diffusion, which means to step back from a fused belief. So the I failed, that becomes I am a failure. I failed the thought, you internalize it, exactly. You become fused to it, and it becomes I am a failure. So there is this fused belief in people's heads that aloneness is dangerous, is threatening, because they haven't been exposed to it. They didn't develop the tools to deal with it. Willingness to sit with this discomfort, if it's guided by your values, so your overarching objectives, will help you deal with this, will help you get used to it, instead of just running for relief, like you said, confronting it, or not confronting it, but you used the word
I said a lot of things.
Yes, I know. It's you name it, and then you accept that there is there. You stop avoiding it.
You don't escape.
Exactly. You stop escaping from this
Signal.
Feeling, from this thought or these feelings. So by doing that repeatedly, you learn that aloneness is not dangerous. It stops being a trigger. You desensitize. It becomes a context. It becomes something you can work with.
Yes, and both approaches point to the same thing. This is not a personality trait. And, some people are just naturally, they are not better at being alone. So it's a skill. It was built, and it can be lost, and it can be rebuilt.
Yes, at any point in life, yes.
Exactly. I think what I want to leave with this is the conversation about loneliness almost always assumes the problem is lack of others, but often actually the problem is lack of self. In the sense of not having a stable, comfortable, internal company to keep.
Exactly. Your nervous system can learn that silence is safe. You've seen people that cannot stop speaking. They need to feel silences all the time because they never learned that silence is safe. But that can be learned, and it's not philosophy or something mystical. It's neuroscience what we're talking here. And learning it, so this work of learning it, or relearning it, because maybe you had it and you lost it and you need to reacquire, is something that is available to anyone.
Yes. Well, thank you for watching us, and we will see you in the next strat.
And do not hesitate to check the previous strats, because this conversation is a continuation of the same themes. Take care.
Take care.